May is one of my favorite months to fish out of the whole year, and to me represents the start of summertime bass fishing. I love fishing during the warmer months because of how active the fish are and how aggressive they will strike your lure. Whenever it comes to selecting lures to use in May, it is important to remember how much that has changed over just the past month alone. Most places throughout the country, bass have already started to spawn, and up north, the prespawn has started depending on where you are at. Also, many places across the southern part of the country are already in the post-spawn stage. It was difficult to select 5 lures to talk about today, but these 5 lures will work in many situations throughout the whole country. Let me know down below if you agree or disagree with my top 5 baits to use in May in the comments section down below. Also, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. We are on the way to 5K by the end of the year, and I would love to have you guys join the community. At the time of recording this video, we're at 2,200 subscribers, and I can't believe how quick the channel's growing. I just wanted to say I really do appreciate you guys, and I appreciate all the support you guys have given me. But anyways, guys, let's get into the video. The first lure I want to talk about today is the Shaky Head. The Shaky Head is a productive lure to use this time of year, especially whenever the bite gets tough. The Shaky Head shines whenever you're fishing around different types of cover and can trigger some big bites. The Shaky Head is a weedless presentation, so you're able to fish it pretty much anywhere, honestly. There's 2 main styles of Shaky Heads that are on the market today. The first Shaky Head design is a ball head, which gives the bait a unique action by rocking back and forth whenever you retrieve it, and you can drag this really slow on the bottom. The second Shaky Head design is a stand-up head, which gives the Shaky Head a completely different action compared to using a ball head. The stand-up jig head is mainly used around rocks and does well here in Western North Carolina. Many people will use a finesse worm whenever they are considering what to put on the back of their Shaky Head. However, it never hurts to experiment and see what works well in your area, so just kind of keep that in mind. Most people will throw a Shaky Head on a spinning rod with light line. Personally, I like to use 8-pound tests because I fish in clear water most of the time, but that comes down to personal preference and where you're fishing at in the country. The Shaky Head truly shines this time of year and can produce some huge bites. Make sure you have this tied on whenever you go out anytime this month. The second lure I'm going to talk about today is the Wacky Rig. The Wacky Rig is one of my favorite finesse techniques this time of year due to its larger profile in the water. I especially love using a Wacky Rig when targeting largemouth, but also have success targeting spots and smallmouth bass using the Wacky Rig. The Wacky Rig is a versatile rig due to how much you can change the presentation of it just by changing up what type of worm you're using and what type of hook you're using. Also, depending on what worm you decide to use can determine its rate that your Wacky Rig will fall down in the water column. For example, the Yum Dinger is one of the slowest sinking Senkos on the market, but whenever you are using a Gary Yamamoto Senko, those sink a lot quicker compared to the Yum Dingers. So just keep that in mind. Depending on what mood the bass are in for that day will determine which one they're going to hit more. It is important to experiment though, so go and see what they want for that day, because it will change depending on the day and what exactly they are wanting. So keep that in mind. Sometimes they want a slower sinking worm, while on other days they want that faster sinking worm. It can be fished in many different scenarios and shines when targeting shallow bass. I caught a decent bass while I was down on Lake Guntersville a few months ago, throwing a Wacky Rig. Many people don't like to throw the Wacky Rig because they think that it just will not catch big bass, but I am here to tell you that it catches some giant fish. Whenever I was on Guntersville, I was catching all of my bass in less than a foot of water with the Wacky Rig. Whenever me and Christian got back to the boat launch, we were the only boat that day to even catch them because we were the only ones who decided to go up shallow for that day. Whenever I see shallow water, one of the first lures that pops in my head is the Wacky Rig, especially whenever I need to skip it underneath something. I love to skip the Wacky Rig under docks or under branches hanging over the bank. Normally I will trigger a reaction strike once I get it up in there. It is one of my favorite lures to skip and is by far one of the easiest lures to skip in my opinion. If you do not have a Wacky Rig tied on this time of year, you are missing out on one of the best finesse baits to throw whenever the bass are up shallow. The third lure I want to talk about today is the square bill crankbait. The square bill crankbait is one of my favorite ways to target target shallow bass whenever they will hit a reaction style bait. The square bill is such an effective lure to use, especially to get some huge bass to bite. When fishing a square bill, I will cast over where I think the bass will be at and burn the square bill quickly back to me, trying to trigger a reaction strike out of the bass. One of the best ways to trigger a reaction strike is by deflecting the square bill off of any type of structure, and the bass will slam it. I normally try to bounce the square bill off of rocks most of the time, but I will throw it around timber too, depending on where the bass are at that day. If the square bill gets hung up, most of the time you can stop reeling and the square bill will float out of the snag, unless if you hook a 3-pounder. And trust me, I know from experience. The square bill can be fished in muddy water conditions and in clear water. Some of my favorite stained or muddy watercolors are chartreuse and red this time of year. Whenever I am fishing in clear water, I like to imitate whatever the bass are feeding on, but normally a bluegill or craw pattern will do. Throwing a square bill this time of year is really addictive, and you will not want to put it down the next time you're out in the water in the month of May. The fourth lure I am going to talk about today is the Texas rig. The Texas rig is a good choice this time of year because of how many different presentations you can do with this rig, depending on if you peg the weight you use, and the plastic you decide to use. Make sure you experiment with the Texas rig to figure out what to imitate and what works best for you. The Texas rig can be an effective lure, especially when going to a new body of water. Many people love to use the Texas rig because of how well it comes through cover due to exposing the hook. Personally, I like to peg the weight on my Texas rig so it does not get hung up as much, but it totally depends on where you're fishing and around what type of structure. And honestly, at the end of the day, it really depends on what the bass are wanting to bite. So take that into account too. Many people will not peg their weight, so it truly comes down to personal preference at the end of the day. No matter which way you go about it, pegging the weight or not pegging the weight will change the action of your Texas rig, and some days the bass will want it pegged, or other days they will not want it pegged. However, another option, a lot of people love to use a weightless Texas rig, and this technique works well when the bass are pushed up shallow like they are in May. Also, using a weightless Texas rig can trigger more strikes in areas with higher pressure due to the more natural action of the Texas rig moving throughout the water compared to if you had a weight in front of it. The Texas rig can be fished pretty much everywhere, no matter if the bass are shallow on beds or in deeper water. The Texas rig will catch them in pretty much any scenario. You can change up the retrieve too and fish the Texas rig many different ways. However, my favorite way to work the Texas rig is by dragging it slowly across the bottom or through structure. You get some nice sized bass doing this, and is hands down one of the most versatile lures on this list with how many different ways you can rig it up and fish the Texas rig. If you are not throwing a Texas rig this time of year, you are missing out on one of the most effective lures to catch some huge bass. The fifth lure I'm going to talk about today is the jig. The jig is probably one of my favorite lures to throw all year. A jig can produce some huge bites, and it's one of my confidence baits to catch big bass. The large profile of a jig works well, especially when trying to get the bass to bite while they are bedding. Here in western North Carolina, many bass are still on beds right now, and a jig can aggravate a bass into biting to get it off of its bed. Imitating a bluegill or going with a solid white color jig is one of the best ways to target big bass on beds. However, make sure you do not release the bass too far away from their beds and that you get them back in the water near where they were bedding. A jig is a very versatile lure and can be fished in many different scenarios depending on where you're fishing at in the country. The jig can be used to catch shallow bass whenever they are getting ready to spawn, and can also be used in deeper water when bass are still sitting deep depending on where you're at in the country. There's many different types of jigs and trailers to use and can become overwhelming for a new angler. I plan on doing a much more in-depth guide talking about jigs in the future, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. The jig can also be fished in many different scenarios around rocks, vegetation, and different types of structure depending on what style jig head head you are using. The drawing power of a large profile jig can result in some huge bites during the month of May and can potentially catch your new personal best. Also, what style jig do you use the most in your local body of water? Let me know down below. These are my top 5 lures to use in May, and these lures will help you catch more bass whenever you're fishing this month. However, bass fishing is not an exact science, so make sure you experiment to see what works well in your local body of water. It was hard to select 5 lures for this month, but these 5 lures will work in many conditions across the country. If you have any questions or comments, let me know down below. Also, let me know if you agree or disagree with my top 5 May lures, or if I missed your favorite lure to use this time of year. I would appreciate the feedback. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button to help the video in the YouTube algorithm so more people can get recommended this video. If you are not subscribed and you made it this far, I would love to have you guys join the community. I plan on doing more videos like this in the future, releasing one of these every week. If you want to know a good technique that catches some huge bass, make sure you check this one out right here. I promise you won't be disappointed.